You know that feeling you get in the dark when the familiar shapes of your own home start to feel alien. The shadows in the corner of your eye start playing tricks on you. But the real horror, the kind that settles deep in your bones, is when you realize you're not just looking out into the night. Someone is looking back in. Tonight, we have 4 true stories submitted by viewers from people who discovered their neighbors were watching them from the shadows. These are stories about the violation of the one place you're supposed to feel safe, and the terrifying realization that the person next door isn't who you think they are. Story 1, The Man in the Courtyard. Our first story comes from a woman named Chloe, and it's a chilling reminder that sometimes modern technology shows us things we were never meant to see. I moved into my first solo apartment a little over 2 years ago. It felt like a huge step, a real sign of adulthood. The building was one of those renovated brick walk-ups with a central courtyard that was supposed to be a selling point. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, overlooking this courtyard, and one of the first things I did was install a Ring camera. It wasn't that I felt unsafe. It just seemed like the smart thing to do. For the first few months, life was perfect. My neighbors were a mix of young professionals and older folks. Everyone was friendly, and it was quiet, peaceful. Then, the unit directly across the hall from me, which had been empty since I moved in, was finally rented. I remember seeing the moving truck one Saturday. The new tenant was a man who looked to be in his late 30s. I passed him in the hall later that day, and I smiled and introduced myself. "Hey, I'm Chloe, your new neighbor." He just stared at me for a beat too long. His eyes were totally flat and expressionless. "David," he grunted, then turned and fumbled with his keys. It was awkward. "Sure," but I just shrugged it off. Some people aren't social, right? The first weird thing happened about a week later. I was coming home late from a work dinner, around 11 p.m. As I walked down the hall toward my door, I saw David standing at his own door, just staring at my apartment. Not at the hallway, not at the stairs directly at my front door. He didn't move as I got closer. He didn't even seem to blink. The hair on my arms stood up. "Everything okay, David?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. He slowly turned his head, and again, that unnerving, blank stare. He didn't say a word, just unlocked his door and disappeared inside. I rushed into my apartment, my heart pounding, and triple-checked the deadbolt. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing at my window, which faced his across the courtyard, but his lights were off. I told myself I was overreacting. But then it got worse. A few nights later, I got a motion alert from my Ring camera around 2 a.m. I opened the app, my stomach in knots. The video showed David. He'd pulled a foldable chair out of his apartment and set it up in the hallway, right in front of my door. And he was just sitting there, rocking back and forth, almost imperceptibly. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't reading. He was just sitting in the silent, dim hallway, staring at my door. I watched the live feed for almost an hour, totally paralyzed with fear. What do you even do in a situation like that? It's not illegal to sit in a public hallway. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was not normal. He sat there until just before dawn, around 5:30 a.m., before he calmly folded up his chair and went back inside his apartment. This became his routine. 3 or 4 nights a week, My Ring camera would alert me, and there he'd be. I started losing sleep, constantly checking the feed, listening for any sound from the hallway. My home had turned from a sanctuary into a prison. I called the non-emergency police line. An officer came, and I showed him the footage. He was sympathetic, but told me what I already feared. "Ma'am, it's strange, but he isn't breaking any laws. He's in a common area. We can talk to him, but that might just make things worse." He advised me to document everything and call again if David ever tried to make contact. The escalation came sooner than I thought. One Friday night, around 3 a.m., there was a knock at my door. Not a normal knock. It was a slow, deliberate thump, thump, thump. I froze, watching my Ring camera feed on my phone. It was David, his face pressed so close to my peephole that his eye was grotesquely distorted. He just knocked again, 3 more times. I didn't breathe. After what felt like forever, he whispered something to the door. The audio was faint, but I could just make it out. "I know you're in there. I just want to see you." I finally broke. I yelled through the door that I was calling the police. His face vanished from the peephole, and I heard him shuffle back to his apartment. I called 911 this time. By the time the police arrived, he was back in his unit and refused to answer. They told me the same thing, without a direct threat. Their hands were tied. I felt completely helpless. For the next week, he was quiet. No more late-night vigils. I started to hope that my threat had finally scared him off. I was wrong. I was just getting a brief break before the grand finale. I woke up one night not to a motion alert, but to the sound of shattering glass. It was so loud, it sounded like it was in my living room. I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering. Then came the screaming. Not words, just raw, guttural yells of rage. I crept to my front window, overlooking the courtyard, and peered through the blinds. Down below, in the soft glow of the landscape lighting, was David. He had thrown a piece of his own furniture, a heavy armchair, out of his second-story window. It lay smashed on the patio below, but that wasn't what made my blood run cold. In the middle of the courtyard, he'd started a fire. He was piling trash from a nearby bin onto a small but growing blaze, pacing around it like a caged animal. His rage seemed to be directed at my apartment. He kept pointing up at my window, his face a mask of pure fury. Lights started flicking on in the surrounding apartments. People were shouting. Someone screamed they were calling the fire department. I was already on the phone with 911, my voice trembling as I described the scene. I watched, horrified, as David threw one last look up at my window, a look of chilling, hateful promise, before he turned and ran out of the courtyard and into the street. He was gone before the police and fire trucks arrived. They put out the small fire easily. The police took my statement, and I showed them the weeks of Ring footage. This time, it was more than enough. They never found him. David had apparently packed a bag and just vanished. The building management changed the locks on the main doors. I still live here, but it's not the same. I jump at every little creak in the hallway. I still find myself checking my Ring footage from the night before, half expecting to see a man in a folding chair, just sitting and watching. I don't think I'll ever feel truly safe in my own home again. In this next story, the watcher isn't just an image on a camera. They're a silhouette under a streetlight, an unsettling figure that gets closer and closer, using knowledge they shouldn't have to turn a child's world upside down. Story 2, Silhouette Under the Streetlight. This story was sent in by a man named Mark, who was a teenager when this took place. It's about his younger brother and a fear that started with a simple observation. When I was 16, my family lived in one of those sprawling suburban neighborhoods, you know the kind. Perfectly manicured lawns, two-car garages, the kind of place that's supposed to be the definition of safe. My brother, Leo, was 8 years old. Our parents both worked, so I was in charge of him for a couple of hours after school. Our house was on a corner lot, right next to a solitary street light that cast a perfect cone of orange light onto the street at dusk. It was under this street light that the whole thing began. A new neighbor had moved into the house across the street. We didn't know much about him, only that he was a single guy who drove a big, beat-up-looking black truck. One evening, Leo was looking out the living room window. "Mark," he said, his voice small, "there's a man standing by the light." I glanced over. Sure enough, there was a figure standing just at the edge of the streetlight's glow, half in shadow. You couldn't make out any features, but the silhouette was tall and broad-shouldered. He seemed to be looking toward our house. "It's probably just the new neighbor," I said, trying to sound unconcerned. "Maybe he's waiting for someone." Leo accepted this and went back to his coloring book. The man stood there for maybe 10 more minutes before his truck rumbled to life and drove away. This became a regular thing. A few times a week, the man would park, get out, and just stand under that streetlight for a while before leaving. It was weird, but I rationalized it. Maybe he was on the phone. Maybe he just liked to stretch his legs. But Leo was the one who noticed the pattern. "He's always there when his truck is there," he pointed out one day. And I realized he was right. The first real wave of fear came a few weeks later. I was in the kitchen making snacks when Leo let out a small gasp from the living room. I ran in to see what was wrong. He was standing a few feet back from the window, his face pale. "He's closer," he whispered. I looked outside. The silhouette was no longer under the streetlight. He was standing on the sidewalk, directly in front of our house, still shrouded in the evening gloom, but undeniably closer. My heart started to beat faster. This was different. This felt intentional. I pulled Leo away from the window and drew the curtains. "Let's just watch a movie," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "Forget about him. But you can't just forget that." Later that night, after our parents were home, I peeked through the blinds again. He was gone. I told my parents about it, but they brushed it off. "It's a public sidewalk, Mark. He's probably just a weird guy." The next week, things escalated in a way that still makes my skin crawl. I was in my room with headphones on, and Leo was supposed to be watching cartoons. Suddenly, my door flew open, and Leo ran in, tears streaming down his face. He was shaking. He talked to me. He cried, burying his face in my side. I pulled my headphones off. "What are you talking about? Who talked to you?" "The shadow man," he sobbed. "He was at the window. He shined a light in." I ran to the living room. "What did he say, Leo?" I asked, my own fear spiraling. Leo looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. He knocked on the glass, and he whispered my name. He said, "I see you, Leo. It's time to come play." That was it. That was the line. Knowing his name changed everything from a weird neighbor to a direct, personal threat. I called my dad at work, my voice cracking with panic. He must have heard the terror in my voice because he said he was leaving immediately. While we waited, I walked through the entire house, checking every single lock. Everything was secure, but the feeling of violation was overwhelming. Someone had stood right outside our window, in the dark, and spoken to my little brother. When my dad got home, he was furious. He went straight across the street and banged on the neighbor's door. No answer. The black truck was gone. My dad called the police. They came and took a report, but they said there was nothing they could do besides keep an eye on the neighborhood. My parents installed a CCTV system that weekend. For a few weeks, nothing happened. We started to relax, thinking maybe the police visit had scared him off for good. The end came on a Saturday morning. My dad had gone out to run errands. My mom, Leo, and I were in the kitchen when my mom got up to let the dog out into the backyard and stopped dead at the back door. "Mark," she said, her voice strained. "Did you unlock this door?" I looked over. The deadbolt on our back door, which was always locked, was open. A cold dread washed over us. I hadn't touched it. My mom hadn't, and Leo was too short to reach it. My dad was the one who had locked it the night before. We were all silent, the implications hanging in the air. Someone had been in our house, or at the very least, could get in. My dad came home to quiet panic. The first thing he did was check the CCTV footage from the night before. He rewound it to the early hours of the morning, and there it was. At 2:47 a.m., a figure emerged from the shadows at the side of our house. It was the man from across the street. The camera quality wasn't great, but it was clearly him. We watched, horrified, as he deliberately walked the entire perimeter of our house. He peered into the living room window. He looked into Leo's bedroom window. And then he went to the back door. He fiddled with the lock for less than a minute. We heard a faint click on the audio. The door was open. He didn't go inside. He just stood there for a long, terrifying moment before closing the door, leaving it unlocked and melting back into the darkness. The police were called again, this time with video evidence. They took it seriously. They went to the neighbor's house, but he was already gone. His truck was missing, and when the landlord let the police in, the house was completely empty. We didn't stay in that house much longer. My parents sold it within 6 months. The feeling of safety was just shattered. We never found out who that man was or what he wanted. But the image of him testing our back door, knowing he could get to us whenever he wanted, is burned into my memory. Even now, I find myself checking the locks on my door multiple times before I go to bed. And I never stand near a window after dark. So far, we've dealt with threats from the outside looking in. But for this next story, the danger isn't across the street or even across the hall. The call is coming from inside the house. Story 3, The Roommate Who Watched. This story was submitted anonymously, and it's about the terror that unfolds when you realize the person you share your home with is the monster you should be afraid of. About 5 years ago, I was living in a big, shared house with 2 other people, Sarah and Ben. We were all in our mid-20s, working jobs with odd hours, which meant someone was often home alone. We got along great, felt like a little family. To fill the last empty bedroom, we decided to get a 4th roommate. We put an ad online and interviewed a guy named Alex. He was quiet, polite, and seemed very responsible. He seemed normal. His references checked out, so we offered him the room. For the first month, Alex was the perfect roommate. He kept to himself and paid his rent on time. He was a bit shy, almost painfully so, but we figured he was just warming up to us. The first strange thing was small. I came home from a long shift, and a book I'd left on the kitchen table was now on the living room coffee table. I asked Sarah and Ben, but they hadn't touched it. When I asked Alex, he just shook his head, barely looking up. I figured I must have just forgotten, moving it myself. Then, more little things started happening. Sarah mentioned her favorite mug was missing. A few weeks later, a special necklace of mine vanished. We chalked it up to the chaos of 4 people living together. Things get misplaced. The unease really set in one afternoon when I was home alone. I was in my bedroom upstairs and heard the floorboards creak downstairs. "Hello," I called out. No response. Just silence. A few moments later, I heard the soft click of the front door closing. I ran downstairs. The house was empty. No one's car was in the driveway. I told myself it was just the old house settling, but a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. The real terror began when Sarah set up a small camera in her room. It was because she suspected her new boyfriend of snooping. She bought a tiny nanny cam disguised as a USB charger and plugged it in. She told me about it, and we kind of laughed it off. A week later, Sarah came to me, her face pale. "You need to see this," she whispered. We went into my room, and she opened the video file from the night before. The timestamp read 2:13 The house was dark and silent. Then we saw it. Her bedroom door creaked open, and a silhouette slipped inside. The figure moved with a quiet, practiced confidence. It wasn't her boyfriend. It was Alex. We watched, absolutely horrified, as he walked across her room. He didn't turn on any lights. He went straight to her closet and just stood there for a full minute, looking at her clothes. Then he went to her dresser and gently opened a drawer. He picked up a small jewelry box, looked at it, and put it back down. He didn't steal anything. He just looked. After about 5 minutes of this silent, invasive tour of her most private space, he slipped back out. We were shaking. This was our roommate, secretly entering our rooms while we slept. We immediately checked the footage from other nights. There were videos of him doing the same thing on 3 other occasions. Then Sarah remembered her favorite mug that had gone missing. She found it a week later, back in the cabinet, washed. He had been taking things and then returning them. The next day, we sat Ben down and showed him the footage. He was just as horrified. We decided we had to confront Alex. That evening, when he came home from work, the 3 of us were waiting for him. "Alex, we need to talk," Ben said. Alex looked startled. "What's going on?" Sarah held up her laptop. "We know you've been going into our rooms at night." The change that came over him was terrifying. The shy, awkward act vanished, replaced by a cold, flat anger. "You've been spying on me," he spat. "That's a violation of my privacy." The audacity was stunning. "A violation of your privacy." I shot back. "You've been creeping around our bedrooms while we sleep." He denied everything. He claimed the video was faked, that we were trying to frame him. The confrontation ended with us telling him he had 24 hours to get out. He stormed off to his room and slammed the door. That night was one of the longest of my life. We barricaded our bedroom doors with chairs and dressers. The next morning, Ben noticed the nanny cam's battery light was off. Ben, who's good with electronics, took it apart. The battery had been replaced with a fresh one we hadn't put in. It meant Alex didn't just know about the camera, he'd been maintaining it. He wanted it to keep recording. He must have gotten some kind of thrill from the risk of being caught. That's when we decided to set a trap. We called the police and explained everything. They told us if we could catch him in the act again, they could arrest him. So, that night, we all pretended to leave. We made a show of saying goodbye loudly and driving away. We parked a few blocks down the street and waited, watching the live feed from Sarah's camera. We didn't have to wait long. About 20 minutes after we left, the footage showed Alex emerging from his room. He went to Sarah's door, found it unlocked, and went inside. This time, he was bolder. He opened her closet and started touching her clothes, lifting them to his face. That's when we called the police, who were waiting nearby. We watched on the phone as they entered the house. The last thing the camera recorded was the sound of Sarah's bedroom door bursting open and a police officer yelling, "Freeze!" Alex was arrested. When police searched his room, they found my missing necklace and a small collection of our other personal items, a hairbrush, a single sock, a photograph. He was eventually convicted. We moved out as soon as our lease was up. The experience left a scar. It's the feeling of being watched, not by a stranger, but by someone you trusted. It taught me that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones you invite into your home. For our final story, we're returning to that classic scenario, the watcher in the window. But this one comes with a horrifying twist, a discovery that proves the watching had been going on for much longer than the narrator ever could have imagined. Story 4, The Watcher in Apartment 3B. This story comes from a viewer named Ethan, and it happened his junior year of college while living in a large, impersonal apartment building. I'd moved into this massive, old brick building off campus. My apartment was a small studio on the 3rd floor with a big window that looked out into a narrow alleyway. Directly across that alley was another wing of the same building. You could see right into the windows of the apartments across the way, and they could see right into yours. It's that kind of forced intimacy you just get used to when you live in a city. I was a bio major, which meant I studied late into the night at my desk, which was pushed right up against that window. The apartment across from me, 3B, seemed to be occupied by an older man. I'd catch glimpses of him moving around. He seemed to keep odd hours, like me. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear a faint humming sound coming from across the alley. A low, monotonous tune. The first time I felt a real sense of unease was a Tuesday night. I was cramming for an exam when the humming started, louder than usual. I glanced up, annoyed, and my eyes locked onto the window of 3B. In the darkness of his unlit room, I could just make out his silhouette. He was standing perfectly still at his window, staring directly at me. My heart gave a hard thump in my chest. I quickly pulled my blinds shut, my focus completely gone. The feeling of his eyes on me lingered. After that, I started noticing it more. Whenever I was at my desk late at night, the humming would start, and if I dared to look, he would be there, a dark shape in a dark window, watching. I started keeping my blinds closed, but it didn't help. I could still hear the humming, like it was seeping through the glass. Then the sounds changed. The humming was sometimes replaced by a faint scratching noise, like it was coming from the vents. I tried to convince myself it was rats, but the sound had a rhythm to it. Scratch, pause, scratch, pause. It was deliberate. And it only happened late at night. One morning, I went to open my window and saw something that made me freeze. On the exterior windowsill, there were muddy footprints, small, smudged prints, like a child's, but my window was on the 3rd floor. There was a narrow decorative ledge that ran along the building, but it was barely 6 inches wide. No one could possibly walk on it. Below my window was the building's shared laundry room. I went down to check the security camera footage for that area. I spent an hour scrolling through the footage from the previous night, and then I found it. At 3:17 a.m., the back door to the laundry room opened, and the man from 3B emerged. He pulled a small stepladder from behind a dumpster, placed it against the wall, and hoisted himself onto that narrow ledge. My stomach just dropped as I watched him, slowly, carefully, shimmy his way along until he was crouched directly beneath my bedroom window, just out of the camera's view. He stayed there for over an hour before shimmying back. The footprints weren't from a child. They were his, crouched and contorted on the sill. I felt like I was going to be sick. He hadn't just been watching me. He had been climbing the building to get closer. I immediately called my landlord and the police when the police went to apartment 3B. The man played dumb. He was calm, elderly, and seemed harmless. He denied everything. The landlord just issued him a warning. The end came a week later. I'd fallen asleep at my desk, exhausted. I woke up abruptly with that primal feeling that someone was in the room. I didn't move. I just opened my eyes. My blinds were open, and standing at my window, on the outside, was the silhouette of the man. He was on a fire escape further down the alley, leaning over at a dangerous angle to get a direct view into my room. He must have seen my eyes open because he raised a hand and tapped on the glass. A slow, deliberate tap. I didn't scream. I was too terrified. I just stared at him. He smiled a wide, grotesque smile I could see even in the dim light. Then he scrambled back down the fire escape. I broke my lease the next day. I didn't care about the money. I packed my things and moved back into the dorms. I reported him again, but he was gone before the landlord could even serve an eviction notice. He had just vanished. But that's not the end. About a month later, the new superintendent called. They were cleaning out a storage closet in the basement and found a box with my old apartment number on it. He asked if I wanted to see if anything was mine. Curiosity got the better of me. The box was full of junk, but at the very bottom was a stack of old Polaroid pictures. My blood ran cold. The first picture was of my apartment, empty, before I had moved in. The next few showed me moving my things in, taken from the window of apartment 3B. Then there were pictures of me studying at my desk, sleeping on my couch, watching TV. But the last dozen photos were different. The quality was grainier. They were pictures taken from inside my apartment. One showed the cover of my textbook. Another showed a close-up of a family photo on my nightstand. And the very last one, I still get chills. It was a picture of me, asleep, in my bed. The shot was taken from the foot of my bed, from just a few feet away. He hadn't just been watching. He had been inside my apartment. He had been in my room while I slept, standing over me, taking pictures. The police never found him. The box of Polaroids is the only proof I have of what happened, a testament to the man who didn't just watch from the shadows, but crossed the threshold without me ever knowing. The darkness outside your window can be mysterious, sure, but the real terror, it's the darkness you can find in the people living right beside you. The 4 stories you heard tonight are a chilling reminder that you never really know the people you see every day, that the safety of your home is only as strong as the locks on your doors, and sometimes even that isn't enough. Thanks for watching. If these stories struck a chord with you, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more true horror. And if you have a story of your own, a story about a neighbor who watches from the shadows, send it to the email in the description below. Your story might just be the next one to keep us all up at night. Stay safe out there, and, check your locks.